The 90s console wars are alive and well in 2019, now in a much smaller form factor. It's the SNES Classic Edition versus the Sega Genesis Mini. Will Nintendo play it loud with its SNES Classic, or will the Sega Genesis Mini do what Nintendo don't? Let's find out. The SNES Classic Edition is presented in a very intuitive and appealing fashion. Turning the system on takes you right to the system's interface where the end user is given options to adjust various system settings and, most importantly, play games. The interface itself presents the 21 included titles in a simple cover flow format, with options to sort titles by name, genre, publisher, or release date. Moving on to the system's video settings, there are three options. The system outputs 720p HD video, which greatly simplifies the scaling performed by the SNES Classic Edition, since 720p is a 3 times integer scale of the original SNES's 240p resolution. First off, you've got the Pixel Perfect mode, which scales each pixel into a 3x3 square. It looks very sharp, but if you originally played your SNES on a CRT, you might think that this option makes the image look a bit too skinny. Next, you've got the 4:3 option, which vertically scales each pixel 3 times, but also uses horizontal interpolation to blur the pixels slightly on the horizontal axis to keep the pixels uniform and not too narrow or too wide. This gives you a very nice and sharp 4x3 picture, and also gives the pixels a nice uniform appearance so that the image doesn't distort while scrolling. Finally, you've got the CRT mode, which takes the 4x3 mode, blurs it slightly, and adds scanlines to the image. This mode looks to approximate the way an SNES may have appeared on a CRT back in the day. Personally, I like the 4:3 mode the best because it looks great and best approximates the look of original SNES hardware. Other video features include a plethora of borders to surround the image and fill the rest of your TV's 16:9 resolution with, since the gameplay never fills the screen. And thankfully, there is an option for no border as well. Some of these borders change color and animate slightly too, which is a very nice touch. Other than tweaking video output, the SNES Classic is pretty much ready to play. Just pick the game you'd like to play and get after it. Games with save functions will retain your saves when you turn off or reset the system, but as is par for the course, the system also offers save states. At any point during the game you're playing, you can simply hit the reset button on the console, and then you can save your state for that particular game by hitting the down and then the Y button on the controller. Each game offers 4 save state slots, and recalling your save state is as simple as selecting it the next time you want to play that game. When recalling the save state, if you hit the X button, you can access the rewind mode. With this feature, say you got a game over and you create a save state. You could then rewind your gameplay to a point before you died and pick up where you won, potentially giving yourself a second chance at beating a boss or something similar. Other than that, there's a QR code you can scan which will take you to Nintendo's website, where you can peruse digitized scans of the 21 included games' instruction manuals. The Sega Genesis Mini is presented in a different yet equally appealing way to the SNES Classic Edition. As opposed to a cover flow presentation, games are presented in a grid format. Much like the SNES Classic, there are a plethora of options to sort the titles by, including name, release date, publisher, number of players, etc. There's also an option to view the game titles as box spines, which admittedly looks very nice, plus all 42 games fit on the screen this way. When selecting a title, a little blurb of information is given, akin to something like reading the back of a game's box, further giving the system a nice personalized touch. The first video mode to cover is the 4x3 mode. For the vast majority of games, or those that originally run in 320 pixels wide, each pixel is scaled evenly to be 3 pixels wide and 3 pixels tall. This gives those games a nice uniform pixel perfect appearance. But if you're really nitpicking, the resulting image is technically a bit wider than a proper 4x3 aspect ratio, but it doesn't bother me one iota. For the select few titles that originally ran in 256 pixels wide, the resulting image is made up of alternating columns of 4x3 pixels and 5x3 pixels, which will make the image distort as it scrolls, as shown here. Fortunately, this only affects a small number of the games on the system, and there is a workaround to stop the horizontal shimmer, which I'll cover in a bit. The other option is a 16:9 mode, which fills the entire screen both horizontally and vertically, cutting off the overscan altogether. For the 256 pixel wide games, this evenly scales the pixels horizontally 6 times each, which gets rid of the shimmer when scrolling horizontally. Unfortunately, it does introduce uneven pixel sizing on the vertical axis, but personally I think the distortion is much less noticeable vertically. If your TV has an option for it, you can even squish the image into 4:3 mode, which will give you a very accurate and ideal looking image for these games. Another potential use for the 16:9 mode is if you convert the HD signal for use on a 4:3 CRT television. It will fill the CRT's 4:3 resolution with no pillar or letterboxing. There is also a CRT filter you can engage, but if I'm honest, it looks pretty terrible. The image is too dark and blurry, and overall it just doesn't look accurate to how the Sega Genesis actually looked on a CRT. I wish it looked more like this, maybe made to mimic the Sega Genesis composite video output, but since I don't use scanlines when I play anyway, I guess it's not the end of the world. Unlike the SNES Classic, the Mini only offers 2 border options, but that also is not really a big deal to me since I typically elect to play with no borders. The Sega Genesis Mini also offers save states just like the SNES Classic Edition does. You create save states by either resetting the system or holding the start button down. Unlike the SNES Classic Edition, there's no rewind feature, which is also no sweat off my sack. As expected, it's got a scannable QR code that gives you access to high quality scans of the instruction manuals, but digging a little deeper, you'll discover that the Mini's also got one very neat hidden feature. Changing the language might seem like a basic addition to the system, but in this case it also changes the region of your Sega Genesis Mini. For example, changing the language to Japanese will give you access to Japanese versions of the games. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine changes into Puyo Puyo, and the game Castlevania Bloodlines is now titled Vampire Killer. If you change your system to a PAL region, the games will also change regions that way as well. Likely the most notable change is of Contra Hardcore to Probotector. In North America you play as human characters, in the PAL version you play as robots. The SNES Classic Edition features 21 games that satiates nearly all of the gaming genres the system is known for. Whether it be classic 2D side-scrollers, role-playing games, action-adventures, racing games, fighting games, it's pretty much got them all. It's got all of the no-brainer classics you might expect, like Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Kirby Superstar, Super Castlevania 4, Donkey Kong Country, and even Super Metroid. But it also touts having some of the system's more desirable RPGs, like Final Fantasy III, Secret of Mana, Earthbound, and even Super Mario RPG is on the system. The collection of games on the system has been curated with care, seeking to specifically tug at people's nostalgia, but also offer a lot of the tropes the SNES was known for in its heyday. You've pretty much got the system's complete evolution on display here, from the early days with the system's signature use of Mode 7 graphics, early attempts at delivering full-fledged 3D games, the pre-rendered silicon graphics of the mid-90s, all the way to the system's twilight years with wonderful proof-of-concept games. Any way you cut it, there is an astoundingly good variety of first-party Nintendo games and third-party classics. The SNES Classic also offers the first official way to play Star Fox 2, which was cancelled due to the game's original release date being too close to that of Star Fox 64. For the most part, lots of the titles hold up to today's gaming standards very well, but a few of the titles on this system were, and still are, products of the time they came out in. For example, Star Fox and Star Fox 2 haven't quite stood the test of time, as both games are sort of clunky and the frame rate is extremely low, but personally I still think they're a lot of fun to play. Also, compared to the hand-holding and general lower difficulty of modern games, you might be surprised just how tough games like Contra 3 and Super Ghouls and Ghosts are. But looking at the package as a whole, it's just now striking me how many of Nintendo's all-time classics are on this system. Super Mario World may not look like anything special, but I still think the game is platforming perfection and is still the best 2D Super Mario title to date. Zelda: A Link to the Past is a quantum leap from its NES counterparts, and the gameplay is a footprint for every consecutive overhead Zelda experience. Super Metroid started a subgenre of gaming all its own, and that genre still goes strong to this day. Kirby Superstar takes the Kirby formula and adds so much to it that I personally still think it's never been topped by other games in the series. Earthbound is a quirky RPG with lots of heart and charm. Its unique storyline and settings set it apart from other RPGs of the time. And finally, there's Donkey Kong Country, which in my mind still looks, sounds, and plays great. It's also my personal favorite game of all time. Really, the only downside to the SNES Classic is that there aren't more games on the system, because there are dozens and dozens more that I consider to be great enough to be on the device. But for the original asking price, the games that are available are completely 100% worth it. The sheer quantity of games on the Sega Genesis Mini blows the SNES Classic out of the water, because the Genesis Mini has 42 games on it, which is double that of Nintendo's offering. Much like the SNES Classic, the Genesis Mini pretty much has representations of relatively most of the genres the Genesis is known for, with arcade conversions, shoot-em-ups, beat-em-ups, 2D side-scrollers, puzzle games, fighting games. Heck, it's even got a decent representation of RPGs, which typically isn't regarded as one of the system's strong suits. With a selection of games this large, I feel Sega definitely had a lot more room for variety with its game selection. For the most part, it shows. You've got the standards that are pretty much on all Genesis compilations like Sonic the Hedgehog, Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Streets of Rage 2, and Columns, but Sega upped the ante with some titles that came completely out of left field, like Castle of Illusion and its sequel World of Illusion, EA's Road Rash 2, Treasure's Dynamite Headdy, and Konami's Castlevania Bloodlines. Also included is a selection of 4 titles that were never released on cartridge in North America, with Tetris, which was pulled from shelves because Nintendo had the exclusive home rights to it, Mega Man: The Wily Wars, which is a compilation of the first 3 Mega Man games that was only available to play on the Sega Channel in the US, Monster World 4, whose English translation was only ever made available on the now defunct Wii Shop Channel, and finally you've got Darius, which was never released at all until the release of the Sega Genesis Mini. Just casually playing the games in the Sega Genesis Mini's library gave me a newfound realization and appreciation for just how much variety the Sega Genesis's library had. As is expected with any library this large, I do think the system's lineup has a few duds in it, like Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. Sorry Alex Kidd, I love your games, but not this one. Altered Beast, while it was the system's original pack-in title, it doesn't hold up that well anymore. Sonic Spinball, I never liked this game and probably never will, and the oddest selection to me was Virtua Fighter 2, which is not really a good game by any means at all. 4 Bad Grapes is not near enough to sour this bunch though, because I've discovered so many games through this system that I really want to play more now. I was surprised how fun the different isometric adventure games on the Mini were. Both Castle and World of Illusion were fun enough to intrigue me to play through both of them. Shining Force is a very fun tactical RPG that I look forward to spending more time with. And due to the Genesis Mini, you can definitely count me as a fan of Streets of Rage now. To me, the game selection on the Genesis Mini is downright excellent. I was able to play old and familiar classics while also discovering a number of Sega Genesis games for the first time. That being said, I still noticed a few omissions. Probably in most people's minds, the most obvious game that's MIA is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Apparently, it had to be omitted due to licensing issues of the game's possible use of Michael Jackson's music. That's probably also why Michael Jackson's Moonwalker isn't on the system too. The only other game I was a bit surprised isn't on here is Rystar, which had recently been in some other Sega Genesis compilations. I can't complain though, as S3&K and Rystar are still very accessible games through alternative means. With 42 games total on the system, you could theoretically spend an endless amount of time playing through these titles. Kudos for Sega for delivering on such a vast, diverse, unexpected, and overall terrific collection of games. The system's current asking price equates to a paltry $1.90 a game, making both the quality and quantity of games in the Sega Genesis Mini very high. Emulation was handled in-house by Nintendo's European Research and Development, or NERD. I'm fortunate in the sense that I own several of the games on the SNES Classic Edition physically in cartridge form. From what I've observed, emulation quality is top-notch. Video quality is just as good, if not better, than what I could get from my original system via component video cables, and I don't really notice any differences at all playing the games themselves. I've heard that there is some audio lag on the SNES Classic Edition versus original hardware, so I put this to the test myself. At most, there is 10 frames of audio lag, which is not enough for me to really care or notice for that matter, but I know for some other people it completely ruins the experience. There is a microscopic bit of controller input lag, but not enough to ruin the experience for me, as it's nearly imperceptible. I can't tell if lag is part of what the system itself does, or my TV, but I was overall able to play these titles just as well as I always have. I did learn about a strange difference in the game Yoshi's Island, where if you touch the fuzzies in a certain level, the screen distorts for a split second in a way that it shouldn't. The background flashes and various pixelized distortions appear on the screen. As shown here, this doesn't occur on my original SNES console at all. Is it kinda weird that I think the effect actually looks better on the SNES Classic Edition, with the screen flashing like that though? This isn't something I would have ever noticed either, without being made aware of it first anyhow, but it is technically an inaccuracy in the system's emulation. Aside from that, the SNES Classic Edition also adds safeguards against screen flashes. It's especially noticeable in Earthbound, with this weird dulled and blurring thing they did here. Sound quality itself is very good to my ears, but just for you, here are some music titles played back and forth between the original SNES hardware and the SNES Classic Edition. Could you tell any difference? Even the games with enhancement chips in the cartridge seem to perform just as expected, and as much as I love using real and original hardware, I can't find any way to fault playing games on the SNES Classic Edition. It's a solid option, and for a large number of people, the little changes and inaccuracies will pretty much go completely unnoticed. Unlike previous efforts from Sega, they pulled out all the stops this time by utilizing M2 for the Sega Genesis Mini's emulation. M2 is renowned for its accuracy and attention to detail, and it definitely shines through with the Genesis Mini. Just like with the SNES, I own a good chunk of the games on the Mini in physical form, so I'm at least passively familiar with how they should look and feel. Pretty much everything I played was just as I remembered it, and if there were any glaring emulation inaccuracies, they were lost on me. Video quality was great and pretty much on par with what I'm used to via component video on my original Sega Genesis system. Input lag from the controller to the system was about on par with the SNES Classic Edition, in the sense that I couldn't really notice any, but if you held the Mini under a microscope, it is there. I was mostly curious about the sound quality of the Sega Genesis Mini versus original hardware, because from what I've heard, Genesis sound is the hardest aspect of the console to emulate. Here's a selection of classic Genesis tunes, played alternating back and forth between original hardware and the Sega Genesis Mini. Wow, the Sega Genesis Mini sounds fantastic. What do you think though? I fully believe M2 was devoted to making the Genesis Mini as accurate as possible, and in my eyes they succeeded in doing so. The SNES Classic Edition is a roughly quarter-scale approximation of the original SNES hardware. It looks very accurate, down to the gray textured plastic of the body to the glossy purple power and eject buttons. Setting it next to my original system, it pretty much looks like father and son. Molded into the plastic are 7-pin controller ports, and behind them is a door, which when popped open reveals the Wii Remote style controller ports. Personally, I'm not a fan of this little door and would rather just have the actual controller ports where they should be, but maybe that's just me. There's also a non-functioning eject button, as well as the console's cartridge door molded right into the plastic. The back of the unit even totes the vents the original system had, but the video output and power input ports are in slightly different positions than they were on original hardware. The rubber feet on the base of the unit are in the exact same spots as they were on the real SNES, and the only thing missing is the expansion port, which was never used for anything anyways. Overall, it's a great looking little device that looks identical to the way a proper SNES console would look shrunk down. I don't really like the flap for the controller ports, but other than that, it's overall an awesome looking device. The Sega Genesis Mini is hands down the best looking and best built miniaturized console to date. Everything is perfectly spot on, from the colors and textures of the plastic to the adherence to pretty much all of the original system's details. Starting with the bottom of the system, it even has the expansion door for the Sega CD, and guess what? It's removable too. The back of the unit has the video output and power input exactly where they should be. And moving on to the top of the unit, it also has everything the original system has. The cartridge door flaps open, and the slot is just about the perfect size to accommodate a Game Boy Advance cartridge. It's even got a volume slider that moves, but unfortunately it has no analog audio output. But how cool would it be if it did? Since the system outputs 720p HD video, the high definition graphics printed around the ring even makes more sense now. The controller ports are USB and are in the exact same spot as on original hardware and not behind some friggin' plastic flap Nintendo. Sitting this next to my real Sega Genesis system puts me in awe just for how closely it resembles the real deal and makes me wish all of the mini consoles went into this level of detail. The controllers are near identical replicas to the original SNES pads. Technically, the SNES Classic controller is just a skosh wider. It's pretty much an imperceptible amount though. The plastic on the Classic's controller is also a good deal more textured than an original pad, but it could simply be that the textured plastic on the OG controller is worn down over time. Buttons also feel great on the Classic's controller, just as good as an OG controller. Since it has the Wii Remote styled plug, you could also potentially use the Classic's controller for Wii and Wii U Virtual Console games too. The only thing negative I could say about the SNES Classic controller is that the cable is only 56 inches long, which isn't ideal, as I like my wired controllers to be at least a 72-inch cord. Other than that though, I find the SNES Classic controller to be a near perfect replica. I like it so much I even put an 8BitDo DIY wireless board into one of my SNES Classic controllers so I could use it with my real SNES console. Let me get this out of the way. I really wish the Mini shipped with 6-button controllers, as it's what I prefer and what I'm used to, plus the extra buttons are great for fighting games, but whatever. The 3-button controller is just fine too. The Genesis Mini's replica controller is a fantastic recreation of the OG Genesis pad. Everything from the weight, the feel of the buttons, even the D-pad is spot on. The controller is much more textured than the original controller, giving it a better grip and feeling in the hands. The controller also has a very nice 74-inch cable, and since the controller is USB, it's usable in PC emulators and potentially anything with X input too. Even though I'm used to a 6-button pad, using the 3-button pad for the Mini was very easy to adapt to and felt great. Deciding between which two of these systems is the superior choice is really down to personal taste. For me, the massive library of games, the feel of the controllers, and most importantly the terrific emulation by M2 makes the Sega Genesis Mini a must-own for anyone who's at least a passive Sega fan for its current $80 asking price. It's got some game title omissions, but even that can't detract away from the overall package. I fully expect the Genesis Mini to be a hot item through the holiday season and well into the future. For my money, aside from original hardware or an FPGA solution, it's hands down the best way to play these classic Sega games. Personally, I'm still in awe it's able to process all that blast. The SNES Classic is an awesome little piece of hardware, giving access to 21 of some of the most classic game titles of the 16-bit era. But there's one huge downside to the experience. You just can't really find the SNES Classic anymore. It's out of production now, and with Nintendo pushing the SNES games available on the Nintendo Switch Online service, it's unclear if Nintendo will ever deliver a product like this again. This is all the more reason to seek the SNES Classic Edition out, if you can find one for a reasonable enough price, that is. As somebody who owns both, I found a bit more enjoyment and value out of the Genesis Mini, purely because I was less familiar with the system's library of games, but I'd be a fool for overlooking just how great the SNES Classic Edition is. Its library of classic games are must-plays. Which system do you like better? Let me know in the comments. Also, tell me what games you'd like to see go head-to-head on Versus in the future. Other than that, I thank you very much for watching this episode of Versus. Check back later for more.